have with us today officials from the Ministry of Trade and Industry and the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. Welcome. So I'd like to invite the Ministry, followed by the Bureau, to introduce your members.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairperson. I am Randall Karim, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon. I'm Eva Mahabir Das. I'm the Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon. Candice Lackensing, Director of Policy and Strategy at the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon. Dennis Scott, Senior Business Analyst at the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
I am Lawford Dupree, Chairman of the Board of the Bureau of Standards.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jose Trejo. I'm the Executive Director for the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards.
Good afternoon. Nadita Ramachala, Manager of the Standardization Division at the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards.
Good afternoon. Gerard Maxwell, Manager, Implementation Division, Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards.
Good afternoon. Carleen Lewis, Manager of the Laboratory Accreditation Service at TTBS.
Thank you very much. My name is Suniti Maraj. I'm the chairman of this committee, and I'd like to invite my members, my committee members, to introduce themselves, starting with.
Good afternoon. Esmond Ford, member of the committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lawrence Hislop, member.
Thank you very much. I will now, for the record, state the objectives of this inquiry. One, to examine the performance of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards in fulfilling its mandate of ensuring that citizens of Trinidad and Tobago have access to quality goods and services. Two, to assess the performance of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards in promoting and ensuring the quality of locally manufactured products. Three, to evaluate the status of the national quality infrastructure in achieving its objectives, especially with regard to contributing to the development of the national industry and a strong export market, and providing support for environmental protection. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Karim, followed by Mr. Dupree, to make a brief opening statement, not exceeding, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, Madam Chair. The Ministry of Trade and Industry thanks the Joint Select Committee and its members for affording us the opportunity this afternoon to contribute to the deliberations of the JSC. As you would know, the TTBS is a body corporate established under the Standards Act of 1997. It is a statutory entity under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. The TTBS operates under the purview of the ministry and has a statutory responsibility for ensuring the quality of goods and services which are subject to trade in Trinidad and Tobago, with the exception of food, drugs, and cosmetics. The entity is an important state enterprise, statutory enterprise under the ministry that assists us in contributing towards our mandate to grow exports and to improve the national quality infrastructure. We are therefore very happy to contribute to the discussions this afternoon and look forward to making contributions as required.
Thank you. Mr. Dupree.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, the TTBS welcomes this opportunity to share with the committee and the general public the extensive work that the TTBS has been doing on several fronts to fulfill its mandate of ensuring that citizens of Trinidad and Tobago have access to quality goods and services, both manufactured locally and imported, to contribute to the development of the national industry and export market, and to provide support for environmental protection. As mentioned, TTBS, given this mandate under the Standards Act of 1997 and the Metrology Act of 2004, has long served as the leading quality institution in Trinidad and Tobago, with its vested capabilities and an infrastructure that makes it unique in its current and potential service offerings. With this in mind, the thrust of our current 5-year strategy is to create institutional value and provide a stronger footing for relevance, given the significant investments made by the government over the last 5 decades. We understand that TTBS has to be outward-looking. It must navigate and position itself to promote and support the country's national development agenda to bring a more meaningful impact to Trinidad and Tobago. As such, the plan focuses on 4 main themes: sustainability, stakeholder engagement, innovation, and institutional excellence. We have recognized the need to employ digital transformation initiatives to produce our marketing, sales, and branding strategies, and strengthen the use of management systems to improve our operational efficiencies and excellence. The plan which was provided to the committee, I think, lays out the details of this. So we thank you, and we look forward to the rest of the inquiry.
Thank you both very much. Before we get into the questions, I'd like to remind committee members and officials to direct their questions and concerns through the chair, and to kindly activate the microphone on your devices when you are acknowledged by the chair, and to turn it off when you've concluded your contribution. So in opening, I'd like to congratulate the Bureau of Standards for its 50th anniversary that you're observing this year. Okay. That's quite a record. And I'll get right into some of the questions. I will open the batting, as it were. And according to your submission, there are 44 vacant positions in the TTPS. This is 44 out of how many?
44 out of 212 the current staff, Madam Chair.
Just, what percent is that, 44 out of 212? That seems a big number. And while somebody's working
It's
on
20%, Madam Chair.
20%?
20%, Madam Chair.
That's huge. Where exactly in the organizational structure are these vacancies?
Madam Chair, those are positions that are spread throughout the organization. So there's that's the extent of how those positions are laid out currently.
So do they go up to the executive level?
No, Madam Chair, not to the executive level. Well, not to the executive level, no.
So where would you say they're concentrated, if there is a concentration?
These are administrative and operational.
And how long?
And some technical, sorry, Madam Chair.
How long have you had vacancies to the extent of roughly 20% or even more, or less? How long has that situation endured?
I can't respond to that, Madam Chair, because well, I've been on the ground for 20 months, so I wouldn't be able to say to you precisely how long we've had those positions vacant. What I can say to you is that 13 out of those 44 are really active. We're actively pursuing to fill those positions. The remainder are positions that, depending on the needs of the organization, those are positions that we will intend to pursue.
And generally, how long does a vacancy exist unfilled?
I can't respond to that, Madam Chair. I'm not so sure exactly how long those positions have, like I said, have been vacant.
Yes, I wonder if you have any other member in your team that can answer those questions.
Yes, Madam Chair. The vacancies will exist in some divisions, normally I think probably up to a year. So once the vacancy occurs, the whole process in terms of submitting a requisition, and after the submission of a requisition, it goes out for advertising. So those are the ones that will occur due to the natural attrition of staff. So we've had staff members who would have retired recently, and with those retirements, the process has already taken place to have those positions filled. And of course, in some instances, those are promotions. So after that whole process of promoting upwards, then we will put the necessary steps in place to replace those coming up. So normally it can take to about a year.
Is there a more efficient way of filling a vacancy? It seems to me that what you're describing is a process that takes place after retirement. Is it that the regulations don't allow you to trigger that process in advance of retirement, knowing that someone is going to be retiring?
Unfortunately, Chair, no, we wait until the actual retirement, and then we move forward with respect to the process of filling the vacancies.
You're saying that that is the regulation, or is it habit?
Chair, that is habit.
So would you recommend a change? How does an entity like the Bureau of Standards continue its work efficiently with that level of vacancies? Are we pointing or seeing the need there for a change in policy as regards filling of vacancies? Now, you may also have people who leave the job and move on to someplace, and some people come to a natural. A person who leaves the job might not have given you more than a month's notice, but in terms of retirement, you do have that. And you have a succession plan, which should help you in terms of who are you. Is there scope, and I think maybe the executive director or the chairman could address this, for addressing these people who are retiring before, so that you have a more seamless filling of the vacancies?
Well, I would say it's something that we are conscious of and we have to look at. Sometimes the position that we are trying to fill is at a certain level, and we have to, there's a procedure, we go through the ministry, and then I think they take it to the CPO to get feedback, and that can take some time. I see Mr. Ford nodding his head, and I think he's aware of the difficulties there.
That was the questioning I wanted to come to.
So the Bureau has no authority to make those appointments without the approval of the higher authorities.
Well, we've just come out of the, we've just come out of the budget debate where ministry after ministry spoke about huge numbers of vacancies and the length of time that it's taking service commissions to go through that process. I think what you're describing there is you're being another victim of a dysfunctional process. Let me give way to Senator Lashmidial.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Chair, I just wanted to find out, as a statutory authority, would there be any room for you all to hire contract staff to fill some of the vacancies that presently exist? Because I think 20% vacancy level at your administrative technical level is quite a bit. Is it possible to fill those positions with contract staff whilst you're waiting approval from CPO to hire persons in positions and so on? And then just on the CPO point, is it that you're trying to create new positions that have to go to CPO for approval of terms and conditions, or is it just filling existing vacancies and that itself is taking some time? So 2 questions.
Well, the recruitment right now, for the most part, for TTBS has been on contract. So what we have been doing, I think that the bigger picture here is, if I could step back a bit, is that there needs to be a relook or retake of the structure. TTBS is a 50-year-old institution. The demands of the market has changed since its inception. So what we're currently looking at this moment is to look at the structure in terms of optimality. So there might be a need to tweak the structure. I can't tell you definitively or put a finger on it to see that the organization has the right amount of staffing. It may be above ground or below ground. We don't know yet. One of the things that we're trying to do in terms of the future of the Bureau is to conduct a manpower exercise, which will give us a fair understanding of the positions that we truly need. So I think that for me, that's the big picture. So while we may have those 44 positions, there's that exercise that needs to be done for us to be able to really put our fingers on the structure itself.
Again, thanks, Madam Chair. This one, follow up. But I didn't hear from you clearly. Can the Bureau hire contract workers?
Yes, we can.
The challenge then becomes in the package that we have to offer them. See, it has to fall within certain guidelines that are...
Based on the present budget that was just approved, are there any allocations or provisions provided within this present budget with regards to hiring and new contractual arrangements and so on?
I don't think so.
No, member.
So, but I see that you're undergoing a review of your organizational structure. Do you have a hold on employing new staff pending the completion of that process?
Madam Chair, for now, yes.
And are you at a point where you can say whether your staff complement will become smaller, will be reduced? I see you are introducing, digitization. Is that one of the elements, for example, that might require less staff?
I can't say for sure, Madam Chair, but I think that once that exercise is completed, we'll be able to have a better understanding of. For now, I think we're not looking to reduce the staff. Our intention is to modernize the structure and perhaps pursue redeployment of staff within the structure.
What is the time frame for this review and restructuring?
Madam Chair, within the next year and a half, that's the intention to treat with that.
What is there a discernible impact on the staff that is operating in a situation of short staffing? Is there an impact on them that is noticeable in terms of the workload that people have to carry because you don't have a full complement?
Well, Madam Chair, the challenge right now is to determine the employee output ratios. And I think that's, for me, it's one of the exercises that needs to be done at TTBS because, again, we can't put a finger on that with a certain level of accuracy. I can't tell you whether or not the output levels are optimal and where we need them to be with the current complement.
How would you describe morale, staff morale?
That's a good question, Madam Chair. I think morale is not where we want it to be.
If I could.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair,
If I could.
again, I know you said you are now on board 20 months. It probably might be good to hear one of your colleagues give us in terms of morale. I'm hoping that they would be there more than 20 months.
Mr. Maxwell has the biggest complement of staff.
So let's put him on the hot seat.
I am the manager of the implementation division. The implementation division is an inspectorate. So because it's an inspectorate and the structure of it and the staff understand their roles and their functions with respect to the enforcement of national compulsory standards, within that context, I will say morale is high. And morale continues to be high because it is where the rubber hits the road with respect to the whole standards development process and the enforcement of the standards. So I can say my staff in my neck of the woods, they go out onto the field, they go out onto the market, and they enforce the national compulsory standards with vigor and enthusiasm. So in my division, morale is high.
Okay, so we come down to 168 employees presently, okay? Out of that 168, what will be the ratio in terms of length of service? 10 years, who there 10 years, who there 15 years, because we understand you all are celebrating your 50th anniversary, right? So out of that 168, what's the ratio in terms of how much there 10 years now, 20 years, 30 years? You could give us a little ballpark figure?
Yes, of course, Chair. In the implementation division, and I think this is reflected across the organization, the job of the Bureau is very, very unique. So we have a large percentage of the staffing population with over 20 years service. So if you ask me to fathom a guess, I would say probably approximately 25% of the staff would be there 20 years and above. And if you ask me between 10 and 20, we might be probably looking at about 50% of the staff. So there is a tremendous amount of commitment from the staff. They understand the uniqueness of the job. Generally, I don't think you leave university or high school to say, I'm going to work in a standards organization, but when you get there, you get hooked. So it is a place where we have high staff retention, very, very high staff retention. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We treat him with two things coming out of your submission. A 50-year-old institution, and I want to congratulate you on that. A 50-year-old institution obviously would require some level of modernization and as well to look at your organizational structure because you are moving into a modern era, but your job remains the same. In your submission, you spoke to engaging a consultancy firm, and the project was due to commence or commenced July of this year. So that's five months in. What's the progress of that? How is that project progressing? And could you share with us what's the estimated cost of that consultancy? And if you could share with us the name of the firm, and then I have another follow-up as it relates to the HR aspect, to the org structure. But how is that progressing? Because you're 5 months in. Where are you with that project?
Thank you, member. The project is a 9-month project. As you rightly said, we are 5 months in. To date, we've had a series of training for the leadership team at the TTBS. And we have trainings scheduled very soon during this month for the board. The project also has a component to validate the current strategic plan. So the consultants are currently engaged in stakeholder dialogue with key stakeholders. So they are having face-to-face and focus group discussions with our stakeholders to get a feel of their understanding and their partnerships and roles and functions in terms of with the TTBS. The project is to introduce a suite of standards at the TTBS, which is governance of institutions. It includes compliance aspects of the institution, maturity in terms of the governance standards. It includes whistleblowing, anti-bribery, and corruption standards. So that's the suite of standards that we are now looking at in terms of the project.
Could you share with us the cost, the name of the consultancy firm, and the terms of reference? But that could be given to us in writing. But the name of the company and the cost. And is it a local or foreign company?
It is, remember, it is a local company. The company is ESG? Syntegra, sorry, Syntegra. Syntegra.
Syntegra?
Yes.
Okay. Right. And well, if you could share the terms of reference for us in
We'll be happy to.
Yeah, but as it relates to the organizational structure, and again, 50 years is a long time for an organization to be around and functioning. This restructuring of your, is it being done internally or externally? The project to look at your org structure.
It's being done internally.
Internally.
Member.
And what was the timeline? You started when?
We started in July.
So it's the same. It's a similar project running simultaneously. So the review of the review of the organizational structure, is it the same, or is there a synergistic relationship between the modernization and the organizational structure?
I would say it's synergistic, because the discussions on the structure started when I hit the ground in February of 2023. So the project itself is to help provide, bolster the efforts to treat with the organizational structure. So it's synergistic in my opinion.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Remember, did you want the cost of that contract?
Yeah, sorry, we didn't get the cost of the contract, sorry. Thanks, Chair.
The cost of the contract is just around 800,000 TT dollars.
Okay. I'd like to ask Permanent Secretary Karim, what are your thoughts on that level of vacancies at such a critical agency?
Thank you, Chair. The issue of vacancies at the Bureau of Standards is one that we have noted. We have not discerned any serious gaps in the existing staff complement's ability to effectively execute its mandate. I know it's always a concern when one looks at an organizational structure and see vacancies, and the easiest conclusion to reach is this is a problem. Throughout the entire state sector, state enterprise sector, the public sector, you see a lot of vacancies even within a ministry. And to be fair, sometimes the staff you have are adequate to effectively execute your mandate. Some of the positions you may have, and we've noted, it may be antiquated. So I don't know that the existing vacancy count is necessarily a cause for concern. What is more important to us at the ministry is what the Bureau have indicated. They are in the process of reviewing their organizational structure for the modern era. And we are working with the Bureau to get that exercise completed, because we are more concerned with getting a structure that is relevant than filling vacancies for positions that are no longer relevant.
So is it your view that the Bureau of Standards is overstaffed?
No, I'm not saying overstaffed. What I'm saying is the existing staff complement at the Bureau may be adequate for its existing functions. There are gaps in terms of what we would like to see in terms of efficiency in terms of the Bureau being able to do more work, but some of the positions are indeed antiquated, and that's a fact if you look at the organizational structure. And it makes no sense to go ahead and fill vacancies for positions that have not been modernized over the last 50 years.
Yes, but if something becomes antiquated, it's because it was in need of being reviewed a long time ago.
Yes, and admittedly, and that is admittedly, and that point is well received. And there is a process that public bodies undergo to review their organizational structures. It does take very long, and it requires a series of internal steps to get a new organizational structure approved for a public body. And it's obviously unacceptable that these things take so long, but we are hopeful that the Bureau can complete this exercise in the shortest possible period.
What I'm concerned about is the view that with a 20% level of vacancies, they're still getting the work done, so everything is okay. Because staff pay a price.
Yeah.
And you may be overlooking that, and it is connected to morale. So I just make that comment that it's not a matter to be taken lightly. And if things become antiquated, it is because when they are due to have been reviewed and adjusted, they were not. And then you arrive at a problem like this. Okay, so you want to?
If I could just jump in, Chair. You are attempting to rule out, or you are ruling out a number of projects within the Bureau, but you've stated that you have inadequate project management expertise within the entity. And you also submitted to us that the TTBS will address this through customized capacity building initiatives. The question that we have is, what do these customized capacity building initiatives entail, and what is the estimated cost? Because currently you're struggling with the necessary project management expertise within the entity. And if you're ruling out projects, that would come, that could be a negative for the Bureau. So share with us, what do those things entail and what's the cost?
Thank you, Member. The Strategic Project Management Office was an arm or an element within the National Quality Policy Implementation Program, which fell under the PSIP. Now that SPMO office was intended to have a specific skill set to be able to manage projects. And the intention is, again, let me just say that the National Quality Policy Implementation Plan is at its midpoint. It was approved by Cabinet in 2018 for a period of 12 years, 2018 to 2030. So,
if I could just jump in, as you're on that point, just share with us, or just give us some information on what this national quality policy is that was approved by Cabinet. Just elucidate on that for us a bit.
Well, the national quality policy was intended to build the national framework for quality, national quality systems, so that the arms of standardization, metrology, and conformity assessment, and by that I mean looking at your inspection programs, your sampling, your certification, your accreditation, is intact. Now, the national quality policy implementation was to bolster the national quality infrastructure framework. I wish to say that the NQI or the NQP is not just the responsibility of the TTBS. And why I say that is because it requires a confluence of other institutions, so that the EMA, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Transport and Works, they all form part of the National Quality Infrastructure System. So the implementation program included elements, for example, of understanding, well, the national standardization strategy is an element of the National Quality Policy Implementation Program. So that's a program right now that we are currently revising the national standardization strategy for Trinidad and Tobago. What that means is that we are dialoguing with public and private sector entities through various stakeholder consultations to get a feel and understanding of what the demand for standards and quality is at this present time. In the area of metrology, for example, we are, as TTBS, had a responsibility to improve the measurement system. So putting in place a road tank wagon facility to treat with bulk metering and the transfer of petroleum products. So that's one element of the metrology program. There's also the issue of public call for accreditation for laboratories to be accredited. So the implementation program created an opportunity for labs who wanted to be accredited, so whether it's public or private, to utilize the PSIP funds that were dedicated for the NQP to become accredited. Sad to say that we've not had the uptake that we want for the accreditation, because I think we may have had only since 2018, maybe 6 labs that have actually taken up the availability of the funding for the accreditation of labs. So those are key elements of the National Quality Policy Program, as well as looking at other sectors. So the fashion sector, there is a value chain methodology that we use, which is known as the calibration, which is a combination of looking at quality infrastructure in the value chain. And there were some studies that were done for the fashion sector. So it included key areas of national needs at the time that the National Quality Policy Implementation Program was approved.
So if I get you, just to break down all of that technical jargon for the for the regular listener, it was a policy to have standards, national standards across the board.
Yes,
So across various entities, various sectors.
Yes.
All right. So back to the original question that I asked in terms of the customized capacity building, and what is the estimated cost of that?
Well, the estimated cost, I'll defer to Ms. Ramachala. She probably have an understanding of the cost that was originally budgeted for in the 2018 in the National Quality Policy Program.
So I will say that from the National Quality Policy, one of the key initiatives was to establish a supportive program management office, the SPMO, for the management and coordination of projects within the implementation plan. In the interim, TTBS would have performed the functions of the SPMO by assigning 2 officers to perform that function. So we have a standards officer, 3, as well as a project assistant. One of the issues that we identified in the strategic plan is that we need to have a formalized project management structure to accomplish all of the deliverables within the National Quality Policy. And just to give some background into what the quality infrastructure is, it is an ecosystem of standards, what we call conformity assessment, which means the application of standards, as well as accreditation, looking at the competence of what we call conformity assessment bodies, for example, testing bodies, calibration labs, inspection bodies, supported by metrology, which is essential for accurate measurement. So the National Quality Policy itself had a number of initiatives related to standards, creating good regulatory practices within the country. So part of the responsibilities of the TTBS would be to disseminate good regulatory practices to ensure that we regulate effectively in the most efficient manner. We also had projects related to the creation of an independent accreditation body, and a number of other projects to stimulate trade and competitiveness across Trinidad and Tobago to help our local producers be able to access standards and the associated what we call conformity assessment. So for example, certification. You may be familiar with ISO 9000, which is one of the most popular international standards for quality management. So the intent of Cabinet at that time would have been to engage in a number of projects to help build the capacity locally. So when our local producers are expected to trade, they can access these services within Trinidad and Tobago, and also build our capabilities to participate within the regional quality infrastructure as well as the international arena for global trade to take place. Given that we had that issue of the SPMO, we have to revise the organizational structure, and TTBS would have to determine the cost and the number of staff and complement in order to support the projects. What Mr. Trio, Executive Director, alluded to, we have a number of projects which also fall under other ministries and agencies. And the lead agency or the lead instrument to coordinate all the NQP activities, as we call it, would have been the National Quality Council, comprising a number of stakeholders. This would have been in the submission from the Ministry of Trade. And we are also revisiting the projects within the NQP itself to determine whether or not they are relevant at this point in time. For standards, I'll speak because I'm the manager of standardization. The National Standardization Strategy is, we have a document already, so we had previously issued this National Standardization Strategy by engaging on a sectoral basis to determine the standards that are necessary to support trade, fashion, construction, electrical, as well as update the portfolio of standards that we already have. So that is in train, and we are doing a number of consultations around that. We would have had 5 consultations on a sectoral basis to determine what are the needs of our local stakeholders, so manufacturers, importers, NGOs, academia, practitioners as well. Construction is very important. Within the portfolio of standards at the TTBS, construction and electrical are the main areas at this time, but we also need to support the Export Diversification Trust that the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is doing. So we work closely with the MTI in the development of a new export strategy. And this is where standards come in, international and regional standards. I should highlight that we are part of the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. And we are representing the interests of local stakeholders within the regional standardization arena. So in terms of the SPMO, to go back to that question, that is a part of the review of our organizational structure. And I would highlight one of the key projects in national quality policy was the revision of our Standards Act, which is 1997, and the Metrology Act, which is 2004. We had a project where proposed amendments were made, and we're liaising closely with the Ministry of Trade to get those amendments done, which would enhance the TTBS's capability to execute its mandate. And in order to serve the current strategic plan as well as the proposed amendments, project management has come to the fore in terms of being able to manage the number of projects that we're responsible for, and that is also linked to our legislative review, the execution of our new strategic plan, and supporting the Ministry of Trade and Industries Trust. So it is something that we have under consideration. And in terms of projects.
Have you got a response to it?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair. In the middle of all of that information, a couple of things jumped out at me. So in 2018, the National Quality Policy was, you said that project was approved. We are now in 2024. You're saying there are a number of projects, but you needed to have the Office of the SPMO to drive the implementation of those projects, correct?
Correct. And
right. You have 2 members of staff assigned currently to fulfill that role, but you haven't really created that office as yet to drive the implementation of this national quality policy approved in 2018?
So I'll go into some details in terms of national quality policy.
Hold on. Before you get into all the details, just tell me, is that SPMO office that will drive the implementation of the national quality policy, has it been actually created, or is that still something that is in progress now in 2024?
It hasn't been created formally, and that is an initiative that we have on this year's strategic plan. So what we have done in the interim, we have assigned staff members to perform the functions of project management. And also within TTBS itself, depending on if you are responsible for a particular area, the divisional managers also provide a level of project management support in the project management function within the TTBS.
Okay. What can you estimate the cost so far that has been incurred by the Bureau of Standards in terms of the implementation of this national quality policy?
I don't have the direct figures now, but I will say that we get the normal funding through the PSIP, and we have received allocations over the years. Now, the entire quality policy implementation, the funding mechanisms have not been fully defined. So the majority of the projects that are under TTBS's control is funded via the PSIP allocations via the Ministry of Trade and Industry. As I indicated earlier, there are other projects which require funding by other ministries and agencies. So our SPMO is playing a role in assisting the implementation of the TTBS's projects, and we are liaising with the ministry to determine what would be the implementation plan and the associated budgets for the additional projects that are mentioned in the policy. A key part of that is also reviewing whether some of the project initiatives identified in the National Quality Policy are still relevant.
Yeah, well, I would imagine from 2018 to now, things may no longer be relevant, but and I'm only asking about your budget specifically. Can you provide the breakdown over the years of how much funding was provided through the PSIP for this project? And can you also comment, have you all been looking to access funding from other organizations to support this effort, like external sources, IDB and so on? Has any funding been provided from any external source other than from the government of Trinidad and Tobago?
I will defer to PS Karim because he has the PSIP figures that were provided to the TTBS over the last 3 years.
So I can respond to the question. I have the figures in a tabular form, so I'm just doing a quick arithmetic. It's about approximately $15 million, just about 15.5 million for the years, fiscal years 2021 to 2024. That were provided to the Bureau for the implementation of the National Quality Infrastructure. It's under the development program, so it's just under $16 million TT. With respect to the follow-up question, yes, the Bureau of Standards have worked and have been working actively with the Ministry of Trade and Industry to source grant funding, and there are 2 projects that are being funded within the remit of the National Quality Policy based on grant funding provided by the Caribbean Development Bank. And I don't know if you want detail, yeah.
I have the details, no problem, you can give us.
I can ask my colleague, the Director of Policy, to just share a little bit on those projects. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Chair, in terms of those 2 projects, the European Union provided funding through the Caribbean Development Bank for the Building a Quality Culture project, which is around 450,000 TT dollars, again, to build the awareness of the work that is being done by the quality policy. Of course, we established here that it's a lot of technical terms that are being used, and building quality culture is important for the citizens and manufacturers and businesses to understand what quality entails and what is accreditation, metrology, standardization, what are these terms and how it relates to their particular lives. So therefore, this building a quality culture is a project that's being implemented now. And the first project was actually the development of the National Quality Policy, which you have from 2018 to 2030. And that is now completed, where we have the National Quality Policy before us and is being implemented. So that first project is done. Both were funded through the EU funds implemented by the CDB.
Sorry, through you, Chair. When you talk about creating a culture of standards, because I think that at the end of the day, standards are important. When it comes down to brass tacks, we're looking at boosting exports and earning much needed foreign exchange. We don't necessarily, I think we have some amazing things being created in Trinidad and Tobago, but we don't really have a culture of standardization and compliance and inspections. So is there anything in place, or is the Bureau of Standards or the ministry using any of the funding or under any of these heads, whether it's grant funding or internally what you get in the budget, to assist people with implementing standards and creating that culture? Because it's one thing to educate people about why you need standards. I think that's fairly simple. People will get that. But actually being able to do it, because the lady making the best sugar cake in Tobago that we could export may not understand what she needs to do to come up to scratch to be able to really meet the standards to export this. What are you doing to actually help our local people create things that meet the level of standards?
Yeah, bearing in mind that food is not under.
No, but the point.
Maybe the fashion.
Okay, great. So yes, that's a great. But I took the question in the spirit of the point being made, which is a critical component of building the national quality infrastructure. At the end of the day, how does this country generate foreign exchange and revenue from activities, from its products and services? There are a series of grant fund facilities under the Ministry of Trade and Industry that are geared to providing direct financial support to SMEs, businesses and SMEs in particular. So just for the purposes of the listening public, yes, for the under export, the Trinidad and Tobago Trade and Investment Promotion Agency and the Ministry of Trade, persons can access grant funding for standards implementation, for standards assessments, the procurement of consultants to come and do internal audits, because a large part of meeting a standard is being able to get someone external to do an audit into their operations, give them technical advice, and to implement the recommendations. Certification under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, companies can access up to $500,000 in grant, free government money for grant funding, because this is an extremely expensive undertaking to meet some of the international standards for exports. And under the Bureau of Standards, there are other grant fund facilities where the Bureau helps SMEs to meet various technical standards.
Madam Chair, Madam Member, can I also add?
Sure.
That we are currently working with NEDCO.
NEDCO, okay.
And we are embarking on a program to assist SMEs with specific standards that are relevant to SMEs.
Sure. Final question. You mentioned that there's a voluntary scheme related to product certification. Do you see us, well, firstly, I would like to know how many people, if you have that information, would have participated in this voluntary scheme, and then explain exactly what is voluntary and what may be mandatory, and do you see us as a country, and do you see the TTBS having the capacity for us to move towards a sort of a mandatory level of certification for certain things in different industries that would be produced locally?
So from the voluntary schemes, I think from the TTBS perspective, we have currently voluntary schemes as it relates to ISO 9001, which is quality management systems, and we also have for 14001, which is for environmental management systems. So I think that that's the hardest part, because bigger companies they have I would say, may have the financial fortitude to take up a 9001, which is something you have to implement, something you have to maintain, and something you have to pay for on a regular basis, as well as the environmental management system. So I think the idea with trying to push voluntary standards is to, again, try and understand what the demands for the market is at the grassroots level that are relevant to drive voluntary standards. But the mandatory aspect, a good example of that, I would say, is labeling of goods. That's something that it's not just a problem well, it's an issue in Trinidad and Tobago, but labeling of prepackaged foods, prepackaged goods, that's a challenge. So I think that it's sensitizing, educating, being on the ground, talking to people, meeting with stakeholders to to sensitize them of the existing standards that are in place, both the mandatory ones and the voluntary ones. So I think it's a matter of continuous education about standards that are in existence and standards that are relevant.
I get you on that education. I mean, how far do you think the reach of the Bureau of Standards is in terms of educating? Let me give you an example. If you drive to the end of the island, like literally there's no road left to go in Icacos, you will meet a man in a shack with 2 pots and an old stove making the absolute best coconut oil you have ever, I mean, it is the absolute best thing I've ever seen, right? A couple of years ago, I drove there to get, I found it, I bought. I went back this year to get some more, and now he's actually doing a label. He doesn't know that he could export this. He doesn't know, you know, these things, but these are people in concentrated local rural areas that make some really amazing things. And, you know, do you think that in your restructuring, will you be building capacity in terms of your reach? How can you really capitalize on everything that we are producing locally that's so wonderful and great and that we could potentially be exporting? And is that really going to be your job, or is it more in the Ministry of Trade? And what other organizations do you think you can work with to expand your reach on education for something as simple as labeling, to tell people how they could properly label their products instead of making it in an old rum bottle and just trying to sell it from the beach?
Remember, it's a collaborative effort. I think that it requires, as I said earlier in my statement, that the National Quality Infrastructure System requires a collective, as Ms. Ramachala said, is an ecosystem of various institutions that must come together to understand what the needs are. It will require us to be on the ground and to understand what those needs are, and to provide not just the support, but like you rightly mentioned or alluded to just a short while ago, is the issue of financing. Because the national quality system is meant for every aspect of productivity. It's not just big companies, it's medium, it's small, it's micro, it's grassroots. So we have to have a national quality system that serves every aspect of productivity for goods and services. So it will require us to be on the ground and being engaged with our partners in trying to figure out how can we collectively treat with those issues there to help the small man too, because the national quality system is not meant just for the bigger companies.
Yeah. So this issue, sorry, you wanted to say something?
Add to the discussion if I could, because I think the issue of whether the Bureau does voluntary or compulsory standards is always one that intrigues me when it comes to the ministry for approval. Internationally, what you find is that a number of countries, as the economy develops and becomes more sophisticated, they tend to move in the direction of voluntary standards, where industry sort of regulates itself rather than the state issuing, I mean, we know our culture in Trinidad where we're not very disciplined in actually following standards and you know, following. But because sometimes when you do a number of compulsory standards, you could put people out of business, because a lot of SMEs may not be able to meet the compulsory standards. Yes, but as it relates to the follow-up question you had, we are constant, when I say we, the Ministry of Trade and the ecosystem of support through our entities and agencies, we are always vigilant for these companies and these SMEs. Wherever we encounter them, we kind of try and bring them into the ecosystem of support that is available. A great example is what you would have read in the newspaper this week with ghee, locally made ghee, and that's one now we are now helping to meet the international standards. So we constantly be vigilant, but of course there is so much more work that needs to be done in letting people be aware of the type of facilities and support systems that are in place to meet international standards.
Okay, I think the issue of public awareness is going to take up a lot of time, and we are going to have, because I think Member Hislop has questions on that. So before we get carried into that, I want to ask a question about a challenge that, Mr. Trejo, you identified regarding the availability of foreign exchange and its impact on your need to purchase specialized equipment from international vendors. Can you tell us what equipment that is and its importance to the work of the Bureau of Standards in order to first gauge how critical your need for foreign exchange is?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yes, indeed, the issue of foreign exchange has been quite a challenge. So, if I can speak to in the area of metrology, our equipment requires from time to time for it to be calibrated internationally. So, for us to be able to send that equipment out or to bring a technician in country, if that's the case, we will require to send that equipment out. We need foreign exchange to be able to pay for the calibration of that equipment. Now, if the foreign exchange is not available, it has serious implications on the ability of the TTBS to be able to conduct calibrations at the national level. So if the private sector requires for a piece of equipment to be calibrated, say in volume, temperature, or humidity or pressure, the TTBS would not be able to do it because it cannot offer the traceability as it should because the equipment is not up to date in terms of its calibration. So that poses a major challenge for us because we need to be able to respond to our clients whenever equipment comes to us to be calibrated. Another example I could cite is with proficiency testing. So last year we had some challenges. We manage a proficiency testing program at the TTBS, whereby we pay an external partner for a proficiency program. And we have had challenges, and I believe, I think the manager of our TT Lab this year as well should be able to elaborate. But right now we're having that problem as, again, that we don't have the foreign exchange to be able to pay for that service. So this has been a problem from last year, and this year we're having issues. We managed to get, I'm sorry to give this level of detail, but we had to get an additional credit card for the company to be able to pay for some of the things online. And when we exhaust those funds, that's one of our only options to utilize the cards that we have at the company to be able to treat with those immediate and maybe smaller foreign exchange purchases that we need to make.
Can I just add? Can I add a few words to that?
Sure.
Just from the board's point of view, when we asked Mr. Trejo what's the progress on project X, Y, or Z, and he tells the board he can't get foreign exchange, my response at a basic level is that we have money approved by the government in the PSIP to execute these projects. Okay, it's identified in foreign exchange what the project requires. So when he can't get foreign exchange, in the past he would come to me and ask me if I know somebody at the bank to make a call, which is, I could do it once. I can't keep doing it. And the point about it is that when you go in around the place and you see what's being imported and foreign exchange being consumed in other things, chocolates and cheeses and so on, and we can't get foreign exchange to execute government projects, I find that's unacceptable. So we have asked the executive director to try and set up meetings with the Ministry of Finance to see if we can find a better way of doing this. Because if we can't get a foreign exchange, we can't execute. We have to then account to the ministry why we didn't execute and things like this. So it's not efficient.
So I'd like to hear, in a more specific way, the implications of those problems in terms of no foreign exchange to address a problem, and the problem is creating what problem for you or your clientele?
Well, I come back to the calibration, Madam Chair. If I have a piece of equipment that I am using to calibrate Mr. Karim's equipment, that he uses
Yes, but
for his
I
business.
heard that.
Yes.
So this is where I want something more specific. I want to know what industries, what types of, your clients that is affecting down the line the public. So do you have people, for example, a waiting list of people who ask you to do things that would normally take, a week?
Well, we have a tensile tester, for example, which is a piece of equipment we recently purchased to test carbon steel bars, which is used in the construction sector. So for right now, we are waiting for the calibration of a piece of equipment, which is an indented. It's an addition to the equipment to be able to commission it. Without us having that or having the funding to execute it or the foreign exchange to do that, we can't perform the calibration or the test for the construction sector. So we could have, for example, I don't have a list that I can give you, but you could have Bhagwan Singh, for example.
I'm understanding more now the nature of the problem, because that is a kind of problem that translates into a shortage and translates into price increases when there is a shortage. So what I'd like to ask is Mr. Karim to respond to that problem and let us know to what extent your ministry is able to assist as the line ministry.
Chair, this is an issue that has been recently brought to the attention of the ministry, I think only 2 weeks ago. We are liaising with our colleagues at the Ministry of Finance to give some relief to the Bureau of Standards. I think it's generally known of some of the issues associated with this matter, and we are working with colleagues to bring some relief to the Bureau.
Again, I'm hearing you, Mr. PS, and also the Executive Director. But again, the Chairman was trying to be a little more specific. I will try now to be a little more specific also in getting the details. So like, for instance, the last year, what foreign exchange figure can you let this committee know where you were having problems in getting foreign exchange from the Ministry of Finance? So for the last year, a figure. Last 6 months, a figure. Last 2 years, a figure. I would like to get a figure.
But that isn't correct. It's not funding from the Ministry of Finance, because the Ministry of Finance does not give foreign exchange.
Of course.
Right?
Right, so it's based on what the Managing Director is saying, that he has a particular piece of equipment that needs to be calibrated. He could either bring in somebody to calibrate it, or he can source the piece of equipment. So to source that piece of equipment, what sort of figure in US dollars we are talking about?
Yeah, can I broaden the question? Because I think the chairman said that in the PSIP, there are details that identify how much foreign exchange you need for the year. So of what you identified last year, how much did you get? And of what you have identified for this year, what are you asking? How much are you asking for of that amount?
Madam Chair, I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but what I do recall from last year, that on average, based on the projects that we had, both projects and operation activities, we needed on average about 100,000 US per month to treat with both PSIP and operational issues. Thereabout, yes.
So that's 1.2 million, roughly? Which in this scheme of things ought not to be that big, would you think? You find that's high?
So, Chairman, just based on what the Executive Director says, he says 100,000 US per month. Give us some details as to how, if they're projects, if these are projects that we're speaking to, how is that, how do you, trying to couch a question in a particular way, but you're saying that, so what is the duration? What's the duration of the projects that requires you 100,000, on average, 100,000 US every month?
Well, I can't answer that because, again, the timing of a project is different, you know, so you have different activities that you're undertaking. But in my discussions, because as the chairman would have mentioned, last year we would have met with the banks. And from my recollection, that was the amount that we would have needed to treat with the projects and operation activities.
Yeah, right, but I'm just looking at it from the standpoint that you said last year, that's what you would have required. Could you share with us the nature of the projects? What were those projects? Because that's last year we're talking about.
Yeah.
And you're saying that you required 100,000 per month. How many months did you require that 100,000? Was it for the entire 12-month period, or?
Remember, I have that information, but I could share it with you so you can have an idea of exactly what the projects were and how much money we need for each of those respective projects. But I can share that with you if you wish. But I don't have that on the top of my head.
Yeah, so as a body that has a significant responsibility in promoting exports, in getting exports fit for purpose in terms of standards, would you have access to foreign exchange through the Exim Bank? Or should I ask that question of the PS?
Member, no, the TTBS do not currently have access to the facilities at the Exim Bank. I just want to clarify one thing. What you see in the PSIP are not the foreign exchange requirements. These are just the projects and the allocations for the projects. Some of these projects, as we understand from the Bureau, they have international vendors to pay. So you may have a consultant, or you may have somebody doing calibration services for you, and it's very small elements of some of the projects, and as would pertain to any statutory body or enterprise in Trinidad, you deal with your bank to access foreign exchange. The Bureau has their bankers. What they are saying is that they are unable to access foreign exchange from their normal banking relationships. And they have asked the Ministry of Trade and Industry to assist in getting a special assistance from central government, and that is something that we will be or we are seeking to assist with.
Thanks. Well, I think you answered my question. I wanted to find out about the process of getting Forex, whether there is such a facility through the Ministry of Finance that caters when statutory agencies such as the Bureau of Standards have, international vendors and so on. Because what I'm hearing is a kind of chicken and egg problem, because you can't execute projects because you don't have Forex, and therefore people who want to access your services, who maybe need those services to boost exports and earn Forex, are being impacted. So it's like we're going in circles with the Forex situation, and I think that's very worrying. So is there some special facility set up, or is it that you're just in talks with the Ministry of Finance in order to solve this Forex issue? Because the commercial banks, your regular bankers, as a state agency, you might get a little bit of preference, but we all know it's not really the best situation right now with the private, with commercial banks in terms of access to Forex. So, Mr. PS, I don't know if you are aware whether the ministry has something specifically that can assist some fund or some mechanism where your funding allocated through the budget can be converted and given to you in US dollars or whatever is necessary.
So I am not aware, but I wouldn't use my ignorance to mean that it doesn't exist. As I said, this is an issue that has literally just came to the ministry about 2 weeks ago, and we are seeking glad clarification from the ministry to get some assistance to the Bureau of Standards.
Yeah, let's keep in mind the Bureau of Standards is not a private company. That only its bankers is the only source. It's a critical.
Madam Chair, just one thing. Again, the managing director mentioned an average of 100,000 US per month, right? The permanent secretary in the ministry is saying it was drawn to their attention 2 weeks ago with regards to a scenario. You see, and this is the questioning that I wanted to get at. $100,000 a month. You're talking about calibration services, which is one particular action you spoke about. But I'm thinking for 100,000 US per month, which is 1.2 million for the year, Bureau of Standards. I think, I'm wondering if we should request in writing, Madam Chair, a breakdown of, what has been said by the managing director, because I am, again, sitting on the outside, I'm thinking 100,000 US for services for the year. Is it that we have some fees to pay to this particular individual for calibration? We have this particular fees with regard to the tire industry. Is it something we have to do with detergents? Is it something we have to do? I am wondering if we should request a breakdown.
We can do that, but he was
Forex
referring
is in the news a lot these
he
days.
was referring to equipment.
Again,
So
help me out.
So I think the question is, the members are asking for some detail on that figure. When you quantify it, for example, if you were to look at a trend over the past 3 years, what has been your need for foreign exchange, for what purposes? And that would probably help. What is your call? Yeah, so I'm asking to provide an explanation. Right, in writing, sorry.
Chairman, we were having such a robust conversation.
Yeah, sorry.
I see.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the issue with the foreign exchange, it works itself out eventually, but it's the time lapse between looking for the foreign exchange and actually getting it that causes delays. So it's only after experiencing this and bringing it to the attention of the board said, let us ask the ministry for the help in approaching the Ministry of Finance. And that's where it is now. So we look forward to a resolution.
Yeah. Is there any avenue through which the Bureau earns foreign exchange? Oh, okay. I mean, do you do any work, say, for other CARICOM countries? You provide any testing for their products or anything?
No, Madam Chair, but I think the intention is to, again, the strategy that we have is one to diversify the organization. So it's one that has been mainly a regulatory entity it's known for the regulatory aspect of the operations. But the intention is to diversify the organization to be able to provide services abroad with the installed capacity that we have. So eventually, at some point in time, yes, maybe.
So, Chairman, I just want to deal with public awareness and public engagement. The Bureau of Standards is a 50-year-old entity, and we've been treating this afternoon with developing standards for manufacturing and services within Trinidad and Tobago. But the Bureau of Standards as well treats with items coming in. So share with us, and this will be part of the public awareness engagement. How does the work of the Bureau of Standards affect me as a consumer? In what areas are you most involved in that will affect the everyday consumer when you talk about items coming into Trinidad? And how am I, as a citizen, how can I be made aware? And how effective has your public awareness campaigns been?
I will defer to Mr. Maxwell, who will be able to respond to part of your question.
Okay. Chair, the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, we enforce national compulsory standards. The vast majority of the national compulsory standards that the inspection body enforces is in relation to imported items. So let me give you a very good example. Shipments of carbon steel bars or rebars, they'll be imported into the country. The inspectors, they go to the various ports of entry or the importers. They conduct an examination, a labeling examination on the carbon steel bars. They extract samples. They submit these samples for testing. And once we get the necessary results that say they meet the requirements of the national compulsory standards, then the importers and distributors of this commodity, they are allowed to sell the items. Now, what we have to understand, Trinidad is in a very seismically active environment. We're also in the hurricane belt, but of course we always say thank God, God is a Trini. So we've been spared, but that conforming carbon steel will go into your structure. And when it goes into your home, you are assured that they meet the requirements of the national compulsory standard. So that is a classic example of the work that we do behind the scenes.
So before you continue, two questions to that. How long does it take when you take a sample? How long does it take for you to get back the results from that testing? And whilst the item is being tested, is it allowed to leave the port of entry?
Okay, as it relates to carbon steel bars, those shipments are released, are given a provisional release to go to the premises of the importer, right? But we have the necessary controls to ensure that the commodities will not leave. So that's the first thing. The second thing, once the shipment arrives at the importer's premises, inspectors will be assigned within 24 to 48 hours to go and do the physical examination and extract the samples. At this point in time, our testing services are outsourced to another state body. The samples are extracted, we submit it to their labs. Normally, the turnaround period we have, because of the SLAs we have, the service level agreements, is approximately 10 working days. So within that 10 working day period, at best, sometimes, you'll make a give or take for a couple of days. We will receive the test results. Those test results will be examined against something called the mill certificate. So the mills that would have manufactured the carbon steel bars, we do a cross-referencing for verification, and then the release is issued. So that is how it works. So from inspection, sampling, submitting for testing, that process can take 2 to 3 weeks.
So have you had any encounter within maybe the last year or two that you had to destroy imported goods based on it not meeting standards?
Yes, we have. Yes, we have had to destroy shipments of carbon steel bars that have been imported into the country.
But Madam Chair, Mr. Maxwell, I think the Bureau is extremely silent on the work that it is doing. I think, what are some of the challenges the Bureau encounters when it comes to public awareness? Because, and that's steel, and not everybody is into building.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked for something, maybe something smaller that affects the everyday man and his operation. Let's say maybe tires.
Well, that's an excellent example. So I think we've developed a wonderful reputation in the sphere of the enforcement of national compulsory standards for used tires that come into the market. So the process, well, used tires are even of an even higher risk factor for us. So all imported used tires have to remain at the respective ports of entries. When those shipments come to the port of entry, and the port of entry that we're referring to here is the Club Deco warehouse, we will dispatch inspectors and inspection assistants, and they will conduct inspections against the requirements of the national compulsory standard to basically ensure that these tires are in fact roadworthy. Any tire or tires that do not meet the requirement of the national compulsory standard, they are destroyed at site. We will issue a release certificate after the inspection activity is conducted, and then, only then, customs will issue the release for these tires to go to the importers' warehouses, and then from there, they can go on to the market for distribution.
So Mr. Maxwell, every container that enters this country with used tires, every single tire is inspected?
Every single tire is inspected.
You're giving this committee that assurance that every single used tire that enters Trinidad and Tobago through the port of entry,
yes,
the legal ports of entry,
through the legal ports of entry,
inspected by the Bureau of Standards.
Yes, yes.
Special reference.
With special reference.
To Tobago.
but I also
yeah.
Very quickly, because I don't want to take up.
No.
But very quickly, and I must if that is so, Mr. Maxwell, I must commend the Bureau of Standards for its work, because when you look at how many tires come in a container.
Yes.
All right. What's your presence like in Tobago?
Okay. Our presence is multifaceted in Tobago. So the inspection body, we send the staff members to Tobago twice weekly. That is on a Tuesday and on a Thursday. So that is the inspection body, inspection enforcement. Recently, though, our office has been opened in Tobago where we have a permanent presence, and in that permanent presence, we have a metrology officer who is stationed there, and he will conduct inspections on the metrology side. So what we're looking at are things related to scales, the gas station, this dispenser. Also, we have the certification division, and they will dispatch staff to Tobago, but the work that they do is more along the hoteliers and accommodations as it relates to certifying hotels and tour guides to the respective national standards as it relates to the tourism sector. So we have a fair amount of activity occurring in Tobago, and one is an area that we are committed to also strengthening. So I ultimately, in the inspection body side, would want to have a permanent presence, not only sending officers there twice weekly, but having the presence of our officer there.
What's your timeline when that is concerned? To let's say, employ a Tobagonian to be part of your team in Tobago, so that person is there permanently. What kind of timeline you're looking at?
The timeline we're looking at for that additional resource is 6 to 9 months.
So within the next 6 to 9 months, we should be. But I'm really concerned about the public awareness and the outreach and the citizenry knowing what you're doing, and that. Yeah.
Can I ask, how do you dispose of a shipment of carbon steel and a shipment of tires?
Okay, Madam Chair, the disposal of carbon steel bars, we had an incident quite recently, and that was done through the mechanism that was set up by the Ministry of Trade, where there is an inspectorate in the scrap iron arena. So the carbon steel bars would have been removed, well, quantified first, and moved to a registered scrap iron dealer. In the agreement between the TTBS and the company for disposal, we would have given certain parameters to destroy the carbon steel bars. The scrap iron dealer would have cut the bars up into certain specific lengths, and that would have been verified by the inspectors, and they would have to get final approval from the ministry's scrap iron inspectorate to load the containers and have them sent away. So that is the current methodology that holds.
When you say send away, are they selling it on to some?
Yes,
Right?
so they will be selling it outside.
And they get, the scrap iron dealer is the one who earns that income?
I can't speak to what is the relationship between the scrap iron dealer and the company who they're doing with disposal for.
It would be, if I could add, it would be the importer, right? So if you import something that doesn't meet the standard and the Bureau comes to you and say, you're not meeting the standard, you need to get rid of these items. I mean, of course, you'll follow due process and the law. And the usually the Bureau will work through the legal process with the importer to get the importer to agree to dispose of the items. And in this example that Gerard has given, it is treated as scrap metal. So the importer will be allowed to re-export the items. And of course, the importer would, I guess, earn.
Okay, so that's a private deal between them?
Yeah.
And is that the same thing with tires? What happens with tires?
Okay, what happens with tires, Madam Chair, is at the port, the tires will be destroyed. So normally what we will do, we have some special knives that will cut the sidewalls of the tires to render them useless. And the onus is upon the importer of the tires to dispose of them. So we don't get involved in that disposal process.
Can the ministry say how those tires are disposed of and what supervision there is to ensure it's not thrown in some landfill, thrown in a river, right? And I want to also raise a question of your enforcement of the steel and tires, and well, the steel in particular, while your 2 to 3 weeks process is taking place. How can you be assured that that is not being sold? A customer may say, I am anxious, I have workmen waiting, I want this steel, give me what I need. What mechanism, or is it an honor system that you're operating? But let me ask the PS to answer the question on.
Honestly, I don't have the answer to that question. I'm not too sure how the disposal of tires are treated with. I will have to find out and put that in writing to the committee. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a very important issue because we know that, and big and small operators just dump things in rivers.
Yeah.
Right? And the other question?
Madam Chair, would you be so kind to repeat it for me, please?
So I want to know, how can you be certain that while you're testing the steel that is at a private location, that it is not being sold or used? Or what is your monitoring system? Or is it an honor system?
Madam Chair, it's a combination of both. The importers of carbon steel bars is a small group of importers, and the TTBS has a system of encouraging willing compliance. So if you have a track record of willing compliance, how we will treat with you is totally different to a company that would have run afoul of the Standards Act and the standards. But generally, what we do a quantification of the number of heats and bundles that are presented for inspection. So we have an idea of the quantities that we're dealing with. So we do go and we do assess the quantities.
Okay, so while we're on this question of disposal, do you have standards for the disposal of fluorescent lighting, the ones that have mercury? Because there's a grand transition to LED and so on.
Yeah,
What is happening to fluorescent?
So the waste disposal issues are handled under legislation from the EME. So there are waste management rules. and our standards cover the technical requirements for the product, and there is a limit for mercury that we would look for. So that is under consideration. What we also do is that we do awareness in terms of the issues around the CFLs because it contains mercury, and right now we are also encouraging the use of the LEDs. So it's a combined approach.
If you were changing out fluorescent bulbs right now, how would you be disposing of it?
What is normally recommended, and it has to be buried, and sometimes that practice is not always followed because you need to secure the mercury.
So we have no
It is
avenue.
Yeah.
I know that I'm aware of one company that deals with big business. It's very expensive. But as far as my own investigation tells me, householders are just mashing it up and putting them somewhere. And there is no oversight regarding that. There are no standards and there is no guidance to the public as to how to do it and how to dispose. And we have quite a significant amount of fluorescent lighting in the country.
So Chairman, I guess that speaks to national policy across the board, the standards that
solid waste management policies. But what I would say is we are doing some work on energy efficiency of lighting products. And one of the issues at some point that we have to discuss is whether or not we ban CFLs because of that mercury issue. That decision hasn't been taken at, a governmental level as yet.
Okay.
But it's something that we are reviewing by setting the energy performance requirements at a certain level. There could be a natural transition or evolution in the market. So moving from incandescent CFLs and then going straight to LEDs. What has been cited, though, is that we could cause some disruption in the marketplace because of the cost of the LEDs. So we are working on, putting out more public advisories, specifically on hazardous chemicals. So we are doing 2 regional standards on hazardous chemicals, and all of these issues are being discussed as we speak. We recently had a meeting. There's a need for enhanced public awareness as we are speaking, hazard identification.
So on the issue of public awareness, do you have a communications department and staff?
I will defer to the ED.
We have, Madam Chair, we have a marketing unit, and we don't have an established communication position, but we do have a marketing.
Okay, so marketing is very different from communication.
Yes. Yeah.
And talking about in an area of public awareness, I recall, and this is just anecdotal, there was a time when the Bureau of Standards had a very high profile in this country and was routinely consulted by the media on all kinds of issues. And it has, over the years, lowered its profile and has become more of, maybe marketing is, maybe it's business-oriented, but the assignment of public awareness, where the average person immediately thinks of the Bureau of Standards in any issue with reference to standards and quality, that no longer exists. Is that part of your restructuring, that you see the need for that kind of role, or do you see that as the role of some other entity?
Madam Chairman, that issue is of extreme concern to the board, and it is being addressed in the strat plan going forward, because we are, like you mentioned, well aware that the Bureau's profile has suffered over the past several years. So we are addressing that as a subject of discussion at the board. And as I said, it's embedded in the strat plan for us to do something about that.
I just thought of 2 great examples to kind of bring us back to the same conclusion on the need for public awareness. Because I know member asked about the work of the Bureau and to give concrete examples. I'm sure for the listening public and viewing public, they are not aware that the Bureau of Standards is responsible for ensuring the proper calibration of every single scale, measuring scale that is used in the country. So that when you go to the market and you buy a pound of tomatoes or a pound of vegetable produced, every single scale has to be calibrated by the Bureau of Standards. And over the last maybe 2 to 3 years, under the same national quality policy we were talking about, one of the projects was the verification of scales. And I think the last time I checked, there's about 400 or 500 of such units that in terms of business establishments that have been verified by the Bureau of Standards. Another day-to-day example, which most people are not aware of, is fuel dispensers. When you go to the gas station and you pay for $300 or $200 gas, the Bureau of Standards is responsible for making sure that those fuel dispensers are actually dispensing the correct volumes, if that's the word, right? Volumes of gasoline. So there are quite a few day-to-day examples, aside from imports, which is the examples we use for steel bars and tires, that the work of the Bureau is involved in, which underscores the need for the public to be aware of.
I have one follow-up question with the inspection, on the inspection side, and I want to ask about public awareness a little more. But on the inspection side, do you have a permanent presence at PLIP Deco? So for example, when a container of tires comes in, is it that you have someone on site there constantly dealing with that matter? Or is that the importer has to request your services? And is there a cost? So do you all earn revenue by offering these services? And what's the cost like, and how much money are you earning? Are you able to fund new projects and so on, or is it just administrative costs that you're able to offset?
Through the chair, we have a permanent presence right now at the Medway Bond. The CES in Point Lisas, we've been doing some refurbishment work with the assistance of our colleagues from PLIP Deco. So officers will be reassigned to the PLIP Deco warehouse. So what has been happening, will be reassigned to the CES station.
CES, right.
So the officer at the Medway Bond would normally cover both. So we're gonna have officers deployed there. So on the tire side, the tire side is actually more by the port itself, and the Bureau has an arrangement with PLIP Deco where they will notify us in terms of the availability of shipments for inspection. So that is one. With respect to the inspection of tires, that is a revenue earning activity. So the cost for the inspection of one used passenger tire is $15 plus VAT. Yeah, so that is, so that's the price per tire. And then it goes up for like truck tires. And truck
right,
tires,
understood,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So the Bureau is earning some money through those little revenue, okay.
Yes, we are.
All right, and the next question, when it comes to public awareness, because, when we talk about a communications department and positions and so on, social media is basically free. And I don't know very many people from, let's say, my age group go down that read newspapers anymore and look at the ads that you take out in the newspaper. Everybody gets their news on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. There's a new one, they do videos and TikTok and all that, right. And, have you all explored this? Because I see you talked about some digitalization in terms of one of your projects. Digitalization is not just about people being able to access your services easier, but also you being able to promote yourself and promote your services and earn revenue. If I am a tire importer and I can go online and I can see what is available and I can book my inspection and I can pay for my inspection and all those things online, and I know what's being provided, and if I'm a consumer and I know what's happening. I remember seeing one, and I've been racking my brain to remember, and I only know of one thing that I could recall seeing in the newspaper from the Bureau of Standards, and it had to do with electronic gates. And the reason that jumped out at me, and I saw it, is because I know someone whose child was killed when a gate fell on them. And that's why it triggered a memory to me. But other than that, I haven't really seen your presence. But if it was on social media and I saw more social media being done, and it's very cost effective doing things on social media. So is that something that you all are looking at as part of your overall digitalization strategy and drive to use social media to reach your stakeholders as well as the general public a little bit more? Because the man in the carcass I was talking about the coconut oil, I'm pretty sure he's on Facebook and would probably see, what's available, on that mechanism rather than waiting for the newspaper or public awareness session.
Certainly, remember that the Bureau does have accounts. It does have its Facebook account. It does have a Instagram. It's LinkedIn. We have our website. So we do have these mediums. The issue is the consistency and making sure that the information that we put out there is palatable to the common man, that they understand exactly what is it that we're doing. I guess the challenge we have as an institution is we're very technical sometimes, and as you probably would have known, very scientific. But our job is, we're trying to see as best as possible how we can break down the information that we have so that people could understand what is it that we do, so that at some point, sooner than later, the Bureau can become that household name that people look to in terms of protecting their interests. So it's making sure that we are active on those social media is part of our branding strategy and building awareness for the organization as we pitch for the new strategy.
Just a quick follow-up before I go into the question that I want. With regards to these inspectors from the Bureau of Standards, in terms of their power and authority to let the workers at Plebeco, customs of them that, listen, this container is not to leave and that sort of thing. Do they have that power and authority that when they speak, they will be listened to?
Yes, the inspectors have that power. The inspectors, they are gazetted, and in the Standards Act clearly describes the remit of their authority. So they have a tremendous amount of authority.
Power and authority.
Yeah, to enter premises, conduct seizures, and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Maxwell, can you say how many inspectors you have in your department?
Yeah, my inspectorate at the TTBS's inspectorate is...
We understand.
Sorry, Chair Needy. The TTBS's inspectorate is approximately 35.
And what is the optimum number of inspectors that you would require to efficiently conduct that job?
Okay, as I had said earlier, at this point in time, we have a few vacancies.
No, I'm not talking about vacancies. In a new structure, given the the evolution of the economy and so on, what would be the number that you think your organization would need to do the job efficiently?
At this point in time, I think approximately 50.
You said 24 before? You have 24 right now?
No, 35.
35?
35,
yeah.
Okay. All right. And that includes Tobago?
Yes, that includes Tobago.
Well, I wanted to go to the accreditation, but...
All right, let me just touch very quickly. Chairman, I just wanted to just back up a little bit on an area that we had touched earlier, and that's to create a culture of standards. But before I get to that, I just want to say that maybe one of the campaigns that the Bureau of Standards could run is Your Life Without the Bureau. And you could do a comparison between, just as the PS spoke about the fuel pump and the scale, what your life would be if the Bureau of Standards didn't exist. Yeah? So that may be a nice campaign, very catchy cartoons and so on. Maybe you should hire me, but that's, that's another story. But no, just to create because standards are important. And if we don't have standards in the country, then everything is gonna fall apart. Just want to ask if you could outline the process followed in selecting a product or service for mandatory or voluntary certification. And the second question is, what are the new products and services that the TTBS is targeting for certification? So first and foremost, what's the process to select a product or service for mandatory or voluntary, and what are the products that you're looking at?
So I'll just give a quick overview of the standards development process. So based on the Standards Act, we are permitted to develop voluntary and compulsory standards. And within the Standards Act itself, it outlines the criteria for compulsory standard. It generally includes health, safety, environmental, consumer protection. At this time, the Standards Act also includes a criteria for acceptable product quality. And based on that criteria, what we would do first is if there's a problem in the marketplace and we receive a complaint or request from a stakeholder, I'll give some examples. So we work very closely with the Electrical Inspectorate under the Ministry of Public Utilities. And at the time, we did not have a compulsory standard for circuit breakers, which is an important safety device for all electrical installations. What we did in interim, we called all the stakeholders together and we had an interim solution, but the final solution was to issue a compulsory standard. That allows TTBS to conduct its inspection activities. So going back to the process, we have to have the need identified. We would establish whether there's an international standard or a regional standard that we could utilize. If not, then we will create the standard using a number of stakeholders. And then after that process is completed, we would issue the draft standard for comment, and we also have international obligations. So if the standard is compulsory, we are obligated to notify the World Trade Organization under the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, and this allows all our trading partners to comment on our draft requirements before it is finalized. What we have done recently, we would hold stakeholder consultations with the key stakeholders. Any member of the public is also invited. We usually hold the consultations virtually. We get feedback from a diverse number of stakeholders, and then the committee would review. We try to follow good regulatory practices, so I'll make a distinction here between the voluntary and compulsory standards process. We're required to get feedback and consult with manufacturers, importers, private sector entities. It is a consultative process, and the Bureau, based on its mandate in the Standards Act, would determine the content. We would liaise with stakeholders to get their feedback through a number of ways. We would issue ads in the daily newspapers to get feedback. We put ads on social media. So we do make extensive use of Facebook and Instagram to alert the normal general public during the developmental process. When we get all the comments, we would review and determine what comments are valid and address them in the draft accordingly. The TTBS Board of Directors, they declare all standards, and the final step for the approval of a compulsory standard is to submit to the Ministry of Trade and Industry, because the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry gives that final compulsory status. When this process, it's a fairly long process. Yes, so getting to the end of it, after the standard is compulsory, we would hold a stakeholder rollout meeting. So normally, if the product is mainly imported, it will be done by the implementation division to advise all the importers that the standard is going to be in effect, and we give a moratorium time so that they have enough time to prepare for the compulsory standard. Now, you asked about certification. We normally use certification if the product is locally manufactured. So depending on the product, if it is imported, it is handled through the inspection process. If it is locally manufactured, for example, cement, hollow clay blocks, ready-mix concrete, those are the key areas where we would have this mandatory product certification. For cement, you would see the TTBS certification mark on the product, also on bleach, since that is a popular household product. And we normally give the manufacturers enough time to transition.
So is all of that available on your website?
Yes,
okay,
it is.
So
he
can pick up the information there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, very quickly, the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards is a member of the Anti-Illicit Trade Task Force. And with our involvement with the Anti-Illicit Trade Task Force, of course, which is being championed by the Ministry of Trade and Industry and the Ministry of National Security, we have developed a product certification program for cleaning agents, and we are in the process of currently rolling that out. So all local manufacturers, they will be subject to developing a product certification program that will allow for local manufacturers now to sell their products on the market. So I think that is going to be something that's very new, very, very exciting. It will take care of local manufacturers who are not producing items that are in alignment with the national compulsory standard. So that is something that we're currently developing and working towards.
We are all aware of the illegal trade that occurs between South America and us. Is it part of your remit to pay attention to that? There may be the same products that you are testing and verifying, but may have been products just coming into the country, that you pay attention to it and bring it under some kind of investigation? Or is that not part of your remit?
When you say, you're talking about illicit goods, right?
Illicit goods.
Yes, of course. As Gerard just mentioned, the Bureau of Standards is a member of what is called the National Anti-Illicit Task Force, which is co-chaired by the Ministry of Trade and Industry and Ministry of National Security. The Bureau of Standards have a huge role to play in the promoting which products are safe and licit versus anti-illicit, but specifically, obviously, for the items that fall under their regulatory remit. So one example that Gerard mentioned is cleaning agents. If you drive throughout Trinidad and Tobago, you see all these bottles of fluorescent blue and green liquid substances. That's well, I have to be a little careful, but it could be an example of illicit goods. And so the Bureau of Standards, through the mechanism which you spoke to, is tasked with, because of that problem, we have declared a compulsory standard for cleaning agents, and now they are tasked with enforcing that and going around. The Standards Act gives them the power to, as we spoke about earlier, to seize and to enforce the standard. So for those items that fall under the Bureau, they do have an enforcement role to play in the containment of anti-illicit items.
No, Chairman, in the interest of the time. Accreditation of labs. Under the Trinidad and Tobago Laboratory Accreditation Services, right, you all identified on page 3 that you all have 8 labs. Right, you all have 8 labs. One of them was suspended. Could I just shed a little light on what created that suspension and what that lab was and was accredited to approve?
I'll defer to the manager of TT Labs.
Okay, thanks for that question. I will start with what accreditation is. So accreditation is similar to insurance. So it is the reputation and the competence of the accreditation body saying that whatever, and in this case laboratory, is competent to produce good results for its users. And they do that consistently. Now the process requires regular reviews with identification of gaps if those exist, and the need for those organizations, once they're applying for accreditation and going through the accreditation process and maintaining accreditation, that they fill those gaps satisfactorily. Because at the end of the day, the reputation of the accreditation body, the Bureau of Standards, is going with this organization saying that the organization is doing a good job. The 8 labs that we listed there for who are accredited, they can be found on the TTBS website. So you can use gottbs.com/ttlabs, and there's a box, a red box with white text on the accredited testing laboratories. And when you click on that, you see the list of laboratories.
So could you just identify one?
So one is Angostura, their quality assurance lab at Angostura Limited.
Okay. And for instance, the lab that was suspended, which they dealt with what?
So the lab that was suspended, it is public information. It is Kaizen Environmental Sciences Trinidad Limited. I cannot divulge why they suspended because they have gaps to fix, and they are in the process of dealing with that and submitting back to us for us to review and submit and make decisions on. We can discuss in camera if anything.
And then they can be reinstated?
Yes,
Based on
once it is
meet the
satisfactory.
criteria. Okay, Madam Chair.
Yes, I would like to thank all of you for being here today, and I'd like to invite each team to give some closing remarks. Someone from the ministry, the PS, and the Bureau.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Before I close, though, I wanted to clarify some statements that were made with respect to foreign exchange. The Bureau is not suffering from lack of foreign exchange. We have some hiccups in the system, which we hope that we will address, that we have a more efficient system. It's not that we don't get the foreign exchange, it comes, it's there. But we want to just make sure that we get a more efficient system, which we're working on right now. But apart from that, I think your comments with respect to the efforts that the Bureau should be making and making itself more well-known to the public, we take those on board. We certainly have been having discussions about that. We are well aware of the challenge there, and I'm sure that we will rise to that challenge in due course. But apart from that, we want to thank you for your questions. If there are any further questions that the members wish to direct to us, we would be willing to submit those answers in writing. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Karen?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, members of the committee. It was an interesting session, and several useful recommendations have come forward, the most important being the need for the Bureau to promote what it does in order to strengthen a national quality infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago and help the competitiveness of our exports of goods and services. I just wanted to say that the Bureau's legislation is being reviewed. You would have heard we spoke about the 1997 Standards Act. We are actively seeking to modernize the legislative framework in which the Bureau operates. So I want to end with that because as part of, we began with talking about organizational structure and redesign, but that will be underpinned by a complete legislative overhaul of the legislation that will guide the operations of the Bureau of Standards.
I take note of the reference to a culture of standards, which is critical. I think at one stage we declared that Trinidad and Tobago had gone metric. Everybody's buying a yard of cloth and an ounce of cheese. And I make that point because it tells you about culture, how challenging culture is to change. Well, I would like to thank everyone for being here today. And I'd also like to thank our committee members and the staff of the Parliament for the wonderful work that they always do in support of what we do, as well as the viewing and listening audience. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.